Australian governments have spent amazing amounts on our schools. In fact, they now spend $20 billion a year more than they did a decade ago. More than 50% up in a decade. And what have we got for that tidal wave of cash, except happy teaching unions? Not much. In fact, by year 9, we get worse results for writing among these students and stagnant progress for everything else. Numeracy, spelling, grammar, writing, no improvement. That's according to the annual NAPLAN results, tests that a number of students sit every year, which suggests that all those extra billions, well, a lot of them could be wasted. I was joined a short time ago by Education Minister Dan Tehan. Dan Tehan, thank you so much for joining me. Why aren't we getting a bang for our education buck?
Because what we've got to do is make sure that all the money we've put into the education system gets results and outcomes. Just putting more money into a system doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get greater performance. So we've now really got to get the focus on making sure that that money is delivering student results. And that's why we're pushing forward a reform agenda to make sure that for every year a student is at school, they get 12 months of learning progression as well. It's why we're pushing to make sure that literacy and numeracy become fundamentals, especially at primary school, and that we've got ways to measure how they're learning their basic literacy and numeracy skills so we can ensure that those students who are falling behind catch up. It's really about putting the focus now on results and outcomes rather than funding.
But a lot of education ministers would, of course, say the same. Can you actually identify where some of those billions of dollars have not been achieving the results? For instance, I'll give you an example. Have we spent too much on simply hiring more teachers instead of better teachers? Because, of course, the more teachers you hire, the less able or the less qualified they must be.
Well, that's a very good example, Andrew. We do have to make sure that we're getting quality teachers into our schooling system, and it's why at the last election the coalition government put $15 million into the Teach for Australia program, where we bring outstanding graduates from other disciplines into the teaching profession so that they can add to the value and the mix of the teachers that we have. And it would be fantastic if every state and territory joined the Commonwealth in making sure that Teach for Australia was part of their teaching mix. But we do have to make sure that state and territory governments are putting a focus on ensuring we get quality teachers. And there are quality teachers teaching at schools right across the nation. The schools that I go into, they're hard-working teachers who are trying to make a difference. But we need to make sure that they're valued, that they're respected and appropriately remunerated.
Yes, of course, because I think you'll find every parent group with every school knows the difference between the good teachers and the bad teachers. They know who's who. But I wonder, is it possible that the extra money we've spent, this $20 billion a year extra since a decade ago, is actually working? Because maybe other cultural forces are dumbing us down and negating the progress. I'll give you examples, more examples. Children being less disciplined, perhaps. Children having less respect for their teachers. More multiculturalism, so teachers are facing less homogenous classes, which is more taxing for them. And perhaps children with less attention span, thanks to video games and the internet. Are those social forces actually dumbing us down?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but one of the things that I would point to, and it's why I've been very firm on encouraging every state and territory government to act, is that I think we should be banning mobile phones and other devices at school. If you're a teacher and if every class for 3 times you have to stop to ask a student to put a mobile phone away. If you add that up over the year, that's a lot of time and a lot of distraction from that teacher being able to teach what they want to be teaching those students. So I think what we do need to see is mobile phones being put away as soon as the student gets to school and not being accessed until after school. So I think that will make a huge difference. I also think we've got to look at social media. I think that isn't having a positive impact, especially on young students. So I think that's another thing we need to look at. And when it comes to discipline, I think one of the things that we do need to look at, and I think this is again something that I'd ask state and territory governments to consider, is what role do we have for school councils, for parents' involvement in schools? What sort of autonomy do we give to principals to be able to run schools? Because I think if we gave principals more autonomy, if we gave parents through school councils a greater say in how schools are run, then you would see a greater focus on making sure there's proper outcomes, that there's proper discipline, and the schools are providing the education that we need them to be providing.
Oh, I think you're absolutely correct. I don't know whether you saw that inspiring story of a few days ago from Britain, a school where a very strict principal at a state school had turned it around by imposing incredible discipline, children having to walk quietly and to their lessons, no talk in the corridors, and a very strict regime there, and she has got astonishing results. I'm wondering, Victoria's response, are you disappointed? They said in response to these terrible NAPLAN results that we should change the test.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful? Let's try and divert away from the results and outcomes of the test, and let's blame the test. I mean, that's the thing that that you and I, Andrew, when we were brought up, were told not to do. You don't blame the umpire. You look at the performance on the field, and that's what we need to be doing. And I must say that Victoria's Labor state government are very good at providing distractions when it comes to these sorts of things. We need to be looking at these results. We need to be studying them. We need to be saying, isn't it great that we've got NAPLAN so that we can get an idea of where we're at as a nation and whether we're flatlining, whether we're going ahead or whether we're going backwards. So important that we do that, and we should be looking, OK, how do we address now what NAPLAN is showing us and what's the best way to do it? And if you look at the South Australian state government, for instance, they've introduced a compulsory phonics check at grade 1 to try and improve literacy in that state. We should be encouraging every state and territory government to do a similar thing, because immediately we can get a sense of, are students behind when it comes to literacy, or are they ahead? And then how can we plan to make sure they continue to grow or catch up to where they need to be? That's the sort of thing we should be focusing on.
Dan Tehan, you today said you were getting universities and our security agencies to work together to stop foreign actors, I'm presuming China predominantly, other countries too, but China #1, from hacking into university computer systems, for instance, to steal intellectual property. And also you wanted this task force, or whatever it is, this alliance, to check that universities weren't cooperating too much with hostile powers, again China, in areas that could help them at Australia's expense. Now, I'm correct, aren't I? This is really about protecting ourselves most of all, but not exclusively, from China.
Well, it's about protecting ourselves from any country that might have malicious intent towards Australia, that might be looking to steal our intellectual property, to steal some of the world-class research that we're undertaking, which is very vital to our national interests. So we've got to make sure that we have robust systems in place. And like all security we put in place, it's about protecting Australia from any threat, wherever that threat might come from. The important thing here is, Andrew, that threat continues to evolve, and we have to understand that. And that's why it's incredibly important that our government agencies and our university sector work collaboratively together on this. And I'm very pleased to say that the process that has been set up, the guidelines that we're putting in place, the task force that was announced today, demonstrates that this is occurring, and that's the most important thing.
So were you worried then, I mean, obviously this is a response to similar concerns to this, were you worried when you heard of one university, for instance, having a professor work with Chinese generals linked to China's nuclear weapons program, doing a joint research thing with them?
Look, there's been numerous examples which have been raised, whether it was a cyber attack on a university or other examples of where it looks like that research has been taken, where we needed to make sure that we had the processes in place. And it's incredibly important in government that you don't have people or agencies or departments talking and calling for action, but that not being heard because we're not doing it in the right way. And this is why the process we've now set up, where we've got a task force, 50% government agencies, 50% universities, so that they can work together on these things. So we're all talking the same language. We all understand where each other is coming from. And I must say, from the time I first raised this with Vice-Chancellors in Wollongong 3 weeks ago to where we've got to now, shows that everyone is taking this incredibly seriously. And that is the important thing, because it is a very serious issue.
Well, finally, I wonder how many are taking it seriously enough, because here's another issue that worries me on the same lines. Last month, we had students at Queensland University protesting in support of freedom in Hong Kong. They were attacked by students supporting the Chinese dictatorship. And China's Consul General in Queensland praised those attackers as patriots. And now, incredibly, we have since learned that Queensland University had hired this official from a totalitarian regime as one of its visiting professors. Surely that's completely inappropriate, especially when we hear that one pro-Hong Kong protester had police in China tell his mother there her son had better watch out.
So a couple of things here. One is that these protests are taking place of this kind, both on campuses and in Melbourne, for instance, out the front of the State Library. So it is something that I think is very challenging. The second thing is that the reason we've put this process now in place of having our agencies work with our universities closely, collaborate closely, so we can ensure that we get the right outcomes which are in Australia's national interest. And this
yes,
is
but Dan Tehan, as Education Minister, what is your own gut feeling when you have the Consul General representing a totalitarian regime being appointed visiting professor at a university after praising people who attack pro-democracy protesters as patriots?
So one of the reasons that we've set this task force up, Andrew, is to look exactly at these types of things and to make sure that our university sector is acting appropriately in these regards. And we can only do that by having very close cooperation between our universities and our government agencies, and that's exactly why we've acted in this way.
Dan Tehan, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure, Andrew.